So how are you doing today? I'm Jeff. My channel name is Not Dead Yet Adventures, and this is just a dream that's been spinning in my head for a few years. Had a conversation with a environmental professor in a country I was traveling in, and it really struck home with me. And so this is just a dream I've had. And then I'm watching this thing about Bill Gates and how he spent $9 million on economical fuel or renewable fuel or whatever for his airlines every year. And it just kind of struck me. If I had Bill Gates money, would I be out there engineering mosquitoes, or would I be trying to dim the sun, or what would I do with Bill Gates' money, right? And I'm I'm nobody. Right? I just wander around the world the last few years, and you know, but this thought's been spinning in my head for a long time, and I figured I'd just put it out there, and maybe somebody will think about it. Somebody with a bigger brain will debunk it. Somebody with a more active brain will hear about it or somewhere, but it won't go anywhere stuck in my head. So I'm going to put this out there. The whole idea is around fresh water, right? So what this environmental professor was telling me, we were talking about like cities and the way they just generate this heat, and he was explaining to me how Israel planted these orchards and irrigated them, and they actually lowered the local temperature just by adding agriculture, by adding I think it was trees, if I remember right, and adding the trees improved the overall climate, brought down the average temperature in that localized area, and increased rainfall. Had all these other side effects from mass irrigation of essentially agricultural land. And I didn't dig into it too deep, but it was interesting because I was looking at what China's doing. China's doing something very similar, where they're out there just creating these large swaths of agriculture out of pretty arid land. And as I'm flying around, I'm thinking, right, and then I watched this video about a guy in Indonesia, a family in Indonesia, and they're out there picking seaweed, and I'm trying to stay a little more healthy. I'm just trying to eat a little better, and seaweed is actually a really healthy thing to eat. It's got a lot of minerals. There's this and that, and they're out there in this like lowland marsh picking the seaweed, and it's a really it's an interesting thing, and all this spins together. And I'm looking at places I want to travel, so this idea pops in my head, right? We don't need solar panels. Solar panels to me are like a horrible idea. Yeah, they generate electricity, blah blah blah, but the energy required to create a solar panel, the mining, the all the technology, I mean, they're good for what you need them for, but to me, mass producing solar panels is just a bad idea. But what about mirrors? Mirrors aren't that hard to produce. They don't require a lot of you know rare earth minerals. They don't require a lot of mining, right? Make some glass essentially and put something shiny behind it, and you have a mirror, right? And then you make the concave mirrors and you point them all at the tower, and the tower glows red hot. And there's a really neat YouTube about the different salts and things they're trying to use in those towers to get more heat. So this idea spins around talking about the algae and the mass irrigation and the solar versus wind and all these things. And I'm like, wait, mirrors are cheap. These towers, they seem a little complicated. But here's where my crazy brain went. And I don't know if you'll be able to follow me on this, but find an area where you've got a lot of sun, and you've got you're within whatever distance of the sea, and you may have to create different types of canals, but why not make a river in reverse that comes across like designed or built agricultural land, or not land but space, that you flow seawater across it, say 3, 4, 5 feet deep, whatever you need, right, to grow the seaweed. Like have a seaweed farm there, and other things will grow in there, right? A lot of other things will grow in there, and have a basin of salt water next to one of these towers, or a little distance away, right? Because you want all the mirrors, you want to maximize as many of those mirrors as you can get to point at the tower. But have like a man-made, saltwater farm for little fishies or something, or crabs or shrimps or whatever you want to grow in there, without all the hormones, without, I mean, all this can be, natural, right? Just natural environment, and you can farm things in it. And that man-made river, I mean, picture like the LA River, how it's wide, but picture that in reverse with seawater going the other way, and just a constant slow flow. Put up some sort of barrier so we don't get the occasional whale or dolphin stuck in there, right? But just some sort of constant flow of seawater going to this tower that has all the mirrors point at it, have that evaporate the water and distill it into fresh water. Now we get to harvest all those minerals and stuff out of the seawater, on a larger scale, and we're distilling all that seawater, so we get all that salt and everything as a byproduct, and then take that fresh water and put it into another pool, another pond, right, and have that overflow into irrigation canals and go out and irrigate with fresh water. And that holding pond and the irrigation, right, I'd want that kind of open so it seeps back into the groundwater, because we're going to filter back and refill those aquifers at the same time, and we're going to be able to use that fresh water for irrigation. I'm not sure I would. I mean, maybe you can use it for populations, but I'm thinking more long term. If we're refilling the groundwater and the aquifers come up, then the wells will be good, right? And we get that natural filtration of the earth, right? But my main thought here is irrigation, right? We can plant now. We can plant in areas that can't be planted in. And when you plant, you don't get that dust, you don't get that nastiness, you don't get this, you don't get that. When you look at that, I forgot the name of the lake there in Russia, but they dried up that lake, and it's just blowing this toxic shit across the rest of the area, across 3 or 4 countries, if I remember right. And if you set something up like this, could you generate enough water? Could you distill enough water to put it into a river and flow it back into that lake? I mean, that's my only question, right? And it's a pretty simple idea, and it's a pretty, on the grand scale of things, to me, it's a pretty low cost system, right? Because you've got mirrors, and those towers, I'm sure they're expensive as all bejesus, right? But if all it's doing, if it's not trying to make electricity, not, I mean, you could maybe use it for electricity too, but if its main purpose is just to desalinate water through heat, not some sort of fancy filter, just like something old we've always done, right? Distill water. Pretty low tech ideas, right? And then put that into a man-made lake with irrigation canals leaving it, going out to irrigate. I mean, this seems like we've been doing irrigation canals since before we've had records, and this seems like something that's just, I don't know. To me, it seems like a no-brainer. And then adding the benefit of creating that aqua farmland, that aqua, you're going to encourage fish life. You're going to encourage crustaceans, crabs, whatever, right? No chemicals, no hormones, no antibiotics, no chemicals, right? But you're going to encourage sea life, and maybe you'll get an in and out flow of some sort. I don't know, right? But the whole idea, and I've come up with different scenarios, like 3 different depths of water, sea rivers coming inland, right? So have a deep one, a shallow one, and then a medium one, because in case of problems, right, always double or triple up. But and there's different things you can farm in there naturally without all this crazy, I don't know, just some thoughts going through my head. But I mean, I just think like abalone, right? How many abalone can you grow on the side of a river like that, right? Or how many net crabs will grow in there on their own, right? How many? I think when you add water and sun and moving water, so you get some oxygen and sun, you're going to just generate life, right? Life is just going to fill in that gap, and we can control that very easily or very minimally, and find the crops or the product or the species that want to grow in there. Find the ones that are tasty, and grow them, right? So that's my thought. And then you can double that up. I remember growing up in California, they were talking about, there was a reservoir that was low, and one of the crazy ideas was, let's park an aircraft carrier in San Francisco and just backfill. And somebody did the math on how long it would take to backfill a reservoir with all the fresh water that one U.S. aircraft carrier can create. And then I started thinking, okay, well, if we've got an aircraft carrier, a nuclear carrier, and it creates that much fresh water just in its normal running, why not take this whole process with the sun on the mirrors and the tower, and why not just create that reverse ocean river to one of these small scale nuclear power plants and just have it do desalination and maybe a little bit of power for the local area, right? But if its main purpose is just pumping desalination, and I mean, think about it, we can build an aircraft carrier and put one of these little nukes on there and run it. What benefit would we do to a country or to a region or to an area like California if we built one of these just for desalination? And how much water could we pump back into reservoirs and things? How much groundwater could we pump back in? How much water can we create to water yards or whatever, right? I mean, imagine every highway in California, if you had sprinklers going and it wasn't salt water, it was fresh water, and I mean, it would just filter right back into the ground, right? And if that's clean water, I mean, the whole idea to me is the more water you create, the more life grows, the more carbon gets captured, the more animal life grows, and it's just this win-win-win cycle. And if we're already building those small scale nuclear things to put on ships, why not mass produce them for desalination? And if the natural process of running the ship creates so much fresh water, and I don't know, I'm just going off what my memory remembers from 30 years ago, 20 years ago, when they were joking about this was a viable idea, except they didn't have hoses and pipes to handle the pressure, and the back pressure, the pressure that would be created or needed to pump water up to the reservoir was too high, and we didn't have anything readily available at the time to do it. So that was the debunk at the time. What's the debunk now, right? What's the debunk now? And if you look at places like the Colorado River, what if we could build one of these desalination plants way out in the middle of the desert somewhere out there, and create a big pipe that brings in seawater from somewhere, and then puts it out into a flat area to get that aquaculture going. I don't know. I mean, if we can build a pipeline from Alaska to the continental United States for oil, can we build a water pipe to go the other way? Can we build and safely create an inlet and suck some water out of the ocean? And then what effect would that have on the? I mean, I don't know. I'm just asking here. But how much mercury, how much of the negative stuff can we pull out of the ocean in a distilling process and a filtering process? And my thought is, I don't really like the desalination where we have all these filters, because it just, like, what do filters have to be cleaned and they gunk up, but if we're just desalinating it, my simple mind thinks like we end up with a sludge or something, and then we purify that sludge in different ways. And if we got some power coming off whatever is doing the desalination, that can be used to purify that sludge and separate it. And obviously we're going to have some stuff that we don't want to deal with, right? And we're going to have some stuff that's useful. We're going to have salt, or we're going to have this mineral or that mineral or whatever, right? I don't know, but that whole reverse river thing to me is, after seeing those people out there in I think it was Indonesia, maybe it was, I'm not sure. I think it was Indonesia. We're out there picking seaweed, harvesting seaweed, and planting seaweed, in these big flat areas. It just seemed like a no-brainer to me because if all you really need is sunlight and seawater to grow seaweed, and it's healthy, then can't we, create? And the other thing that's interesting about this to me is like right now, they put those black balls on the reservoirs to prevent surface evaporations. But think about it this way: if you've got this reverse river and a holding pond for the desalinization, any evaporation, surface evaporation off of that, it's just going to help you, right? It's just going to feed the process better because what's it going to hurt, right? You're not going to hurt anything by making the water more, adding, increasing the saline content in the water because it's going to be desalinated anyway. And you're going to put more water vapor in the air, and that will turn into moisture that will be absorbed by something. It'll either go into clouds or it'll go into local, foliage or something. The whole thing just seems like a win-win-win to me. But I don't have Bill Gates' money, and he's busy trying to dim the sun, and he's busy, trying to bioengineer mosquitoes. And that gets really creepy when you look at all the vax work and how they're trying to put vaxes into, lettuce and other things. It's like all this is creepy, creepy, creepy. When, if you're worried about global warming, this seems like a no-brainer, low-tech solution. And you look at like Saudi Arabia, they're doing that mile. I think it's the Saudis. They're doing that city that goes on for ever and a day. But what if you had a water park? I mean, imagine a saltwater river that flowed 2 miles to a pond, right? And you could engineer it to be as rough or as timid as you wanted, and just raising and lowering the water flow would make it more challenging or more. But I mean, a saltwater whitewater rafting through the desert kind of sounds fun, and it would serve a couple purposes, right? And you create this fresh water. Everybody needs and wants fresh water. So I don't know. I just look at these mega projects going on around the world, and I'm a brokey. I ain't got no money, but this thought's been spinning in my head, and maybe somehow to get to someone that can do something with it. So there it is. Take care.